Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home.
Hello, Karen.
Hey, Dan.
And welcome to the cold December.
I know, it's so cold. All right, I did say last time that I appreciated the taste of the cold weather, but it's a little colder than I have a taste for.
I know. And well, we just had Thanksgiving, so that's nice. My parents came up for Thanksgiving. They came up from Florida. And we did some walking. You know, we visited some of the more. We went to Cambridge, Ohio. They have a nice downtown with some local stores and crafts that my mom likes. You know, but man, it was a cold day. Nice historic towns. It's always good to support your local downtown, your local small business, right? And crafts are just a nice gift all around, I think.
Yeah, and those locally owned shops do give back a larger portion of that dollar that you spent into the community. So whereas you might get 8 cents by buying something online, your community will get 67 cents for purchasing locally. So it makes a big difference in the localized, the local economy.
I think you're trying to say it gives you more bang for your buck.
You get more local bang for your local buck. How's that?
I think we're saying the same thing.
We are.
And, you know, coming out of this break time when everybody got together, everybody traveled, it was cold, everyone's snuggling up in warm areas. A lot of bugs get transmitted that way too.
Because you bring those plants inside too, right?
You know, we moved a lot of potted trees over Thanksgiving break because the temperatures were dipping into the 20s, which is my trigger for bring them inside, or at least into the greenhouse, right? Give them a little extra protection. And not only did it go into the 20s, but it went into the teens, right? So it was pretty cold.
It was a bit brisk, yeah. But yeah, so when you bring those plants in from outside, a lot of times they have some unwanted residency. I can't use words today.
Unwanted passengers.
Unwanted passengers, yeah.
That's true.
And so when we have things inside, people are typically more concerned with using insecticides because you don't want to spray these poisons in your house. And so one of the easiest go-to homemade safe insecticides is to use soap, right? Or a soapy water solution.
And it's also things we're used to, things that we deal with all the time. Like I was talking about people getting together. I was gonna kind of segue into people getting sick. And the best way to keep yourself from not getting sick is to wash your hands with soap.
Yes. And you got to scrub for 20 seconds. Remember that? So, yeah.
Sing happy birthday. Happy birthday. There's a few other things you could do. But and then as you wash your hands in the wintertime, you also notice that they dry out and crack quite a bit, right? So how does soap work? What is soap, right? Isn't that the question?
Yeah. What is soap?
Well, I'm looking at a definition here from the University of York. So this is British. I think the British definition will be just fine. But the way they define a soap or detergent is a long molecule that contains a hydrophilic head and a hydrophobic tail.
And hydrophilic means it loves water, and hydrophobic means it hates water.
But it also means that it loves fat and grease. So we think about this, right? So you got this molecule that has two different chemical properties, right? One that is soluble in water and one that's soluble in fat. And it's all the same molecule. So you have a lot of grease in your hands, or you're washing dishes and there's a lot of fat in the pan, right? And you take that soap and you scrub it. And what happens? It brings all that grease into that a long hydrophobic tail and it binds it. But that hydrophilic, that polar head on that molecule will allow it to be soluble in water and be able to get rinsed out, and it pulls that grease with it. And one of the ways that soap works in killing germs is that bacteria have a fatty layer around it, and those tails basically penetrate into the bacteria. And as you lather up in the scrub, you start tearing apart all the bacteria cells, and then you rinse them off and everything just goes down the drain. So your hands are clean. But there's also oils in our hands, right? So your hands will lose a lot of the oils that protect it, that keep the moisture in your hands. And eventually they'll start cracking because they start drying out, especially in the wintertime when the humidity is so low. It just causes the moisture in your hand to evaporate more, and your hands start cracking, more so in the wintertime than in the summertime. But with enough hand washing, I'm sure it could eventually happen even when it's warm out.
Yeah, if you wash your hands enough, for sure. I know that when I worked at a fast food chain that shall not be named, I did dishes a lot, and my hands would get so dry back using the dish detergent all day long. And so even though I was in Florida and it was humid and it was warm, I still had cracked knuckles and everything. But yeah, it's definitely when the air is dry, it's constantly trying to pull moisture out of your body. In these colder temperatures, we're using our furnaces more, that gas combustion or the electric heaters even, but not as much as the gas, will reduce the amount of moisture in the air. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's why we run humidifiers, right?
Well, that and as the temperature cools, the air will not hold as much moisture, and you have a lower humidity level too. So that's why it's so dry. Like it just starts cracking everything.
Yeah.
But anyway, we're not trying to deter people from washing their hands, by the way. We're
No, just get some good lotion and
we're-
keep your hands clean,
but
right?
yes, yeah. And soaps are very, very good because they allow for killing bacteria without creating resistance, right? Without chemical resistance. Talk about like the antibiotic resistance, right? With antibiotics work differently than soap. Soaps they don't have a specific mechanism they work. They just tear things apart, right?
Right.
So it's very hard to build resistance to that. But antibiotics, they work off receptors, and they're a little bit more technical, and you can start getting resistance that way. And we talk about herbicides and insecticides, and those modes of action is what we call them. They're very specific, and they're usually protein based. And with a certain mutations or changes over time, they can become resistant. But soap is one of those things that it's messy. it's messy, and it's very nondescript. Just doesn't create a whole lot of resistance. I don't see how it could.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing you would have is maybe well, there's a lot going on with that statement because, resistance is when you kill off a large portion of the population. And the only way you can use soap as an insecticide or a miticide or an herbicide or whatever is if you have solid contact. So you got to have really good contact with whatever it is you're trying to impact. So if you are trying to kill an insect, you really have to saturate that insect and get it totally covered with this soap in order to break down that greasy outer layer or that waxy outer coating of its body. So that way, basically, like Dan was saying, it kind of rips it apart and rips those little cells open, and then they just kind of desiccate and dry out.
I mean, it works in our hands too.
Yeah.
If you're out there listening, like, how can soap kill an insect? Well, you'd put enough soap on you, and like it would tear you apart as well, right? I mean,
Well, and that's the key though, because soap is most effective on those little teeny tiny insects, the aphids and white flies and things like that. They're not as effective on, let's say, lady beetles or
Japanese beetles too.
yeah, they're not that effective on Japanese beetles. It's because it needs to be able to get into that insect's outer cuticle or outer skin layer. And now there are some caveats to this, as there's always caveats in nature, right? So let's say cockroaches, soapy spray is really good at killing cockroaches, but it's not because it desiccates them like it does with aphids and small insects, but it coats their sphericals and does not allow them to breathe. So there's a couple different ways that soap can impact an insect, but for the most part, soapy sprays are most effective on those smaller, soft-bodied insects.
Good old aphids. Oh, nasty little aphids. In fact, I think when people bring plants from the outdoors to the indoors, aphids are one of those little pests that are so easily moved. And once they get inside and the temperature's warm, they seem to really grow in population, just explode. So your soapy water can be a good candidate for these aphids. And aphids are soft-bodied, very, very tiny. You'll see them when the populations are really high, and they can cover your plants completely.
Yeah, they breed so fast.
Yeah, and they tap into the vascular system and just start sucking out sugars. They can make your plant look bad. They're definitely going to deter growth, can spread disease. But hey, a great candidate for something as simple as soapy water. But you got to be careful because there are recommended concentrations of soapy water, because we just talked about how soap works, and you have mild detergents and you have strong detergents. And just like if you go to like a mechanic's garage or something, right? You have those very harsh detergents to get the grease off their hands. Well, those also have a bigger impact on the oils in your hands too. So just like the grease can be ripped off your hands, it can also be ripped off plants. Because remember, plants have those waxes too. So there are guidelines for using soapy water to kill insects.
Yeah, and this is one of those cases where more is not better. So, depending on the amount of water you're mixing, obviously, is going to change how much soap. But a general rule of thumb is 2 teaspoons of dish soap to a pint of water if you're mixing it yourself. Now, it is important to note that the formulation of the soap that you're using as your insecticidal spray is really important, because depending on whether it is made with a short chain fatty acid or a long chain fatty acid is going to determine whether or not it's an herbicide or an insecticide. So it's really important to know what your soap is based from, right? And so I think Dan checked just to make sure before the show, and dish soap is typically a longer chain fatty acid.
Right. And in fact, I was looking at the definition for dish detergent.
Okay.
So that one's going to be for grease.
So if you're looking at your ingredients, it's going to tell you what type of acid that they've used for the soap, right? So oleic acid, linoleic acid are some common ones that we hear. You could also have lauric acid or stearic acid. So the oleic acid and the linoleic acid are unsaturated and they're longer chains, right? Whereas your saturated ones, the lauric acid and the stearic acid, are shorter chains. So that is a very important difference. And so you can check online whether or not your soap has a long chain or a short chain, or you can just go buy a soap from a nursery or a garden store that's designed to be used on plants. And then that will be sure to have a result that you want. Because when you're looking at the active ingredient in these insecticidal soaps, it is potassium salts of fatty acids, which is basically just soap, right? So potassium salts of fatty acid, that formation is going to determine whether or not you get lots of bubbles or it's more of a smooth, soapy film. And all of these things are going to determine how well it works at desiccating your insects and not damaging your plant.
Yeah, ripping apart those insect bodies, right?
Right.
Right. And it creates these holes. And, those are the holes that can desiccate them, basically allow the water to evaporate and they die. Soap is quite the painful way to go if you were an aphid.
And the good thing about soaps is that they're not very harmful to humans. I wouldn't recommend downing a jug of dish detergent, but if you did, you'd probably just throw up a lot. It's not going to really kill you, whereas some of the other things that we use would. So from that perspective, a soap is a pretty safe thing to use for humans. It's safe for other mammals and invertebrates, things like that. But if it gets into a waterway, it can cause harm. So you want to make sure that you're not washing out your soapy container in the creek behind your house, because that can then damage the ecosystem in that creek. So always wash your pesticide containers in a safe place where they can drain properly and not enter the water system. And yes, soap in this case is a pesticide. So you want to make sure that you're protecting your water system.
Yeah, I was about to say detergents are considered pesticides. So detergents are pesticides, right? Bacteria is a pest, and that's what kills it. But remember how we're always talking about following the label? There's dangers with everything, right? And like Karen was saying, when you buy soap, it tells you how to use it. And if you deviate from the label, it can cause harm. So those labels are there for safety, really, no matter what it is. I think a lot of times, if we're kind of used to something, we get away from the label, but it's always good to take a peek at that label every once in a while, just as a reminder. Clorox is also a pesticide. There's all kinds of things. And those labels are visible, they're present, and we should pay attention to them.
That's right. And Clorox is just designed to kill bacteria and viruses. So it's still a pesticide, but it's not typically labeled for spraying on plants because it would probably kill them.
And removing stains from clothes.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, but that's one of the uses for them. And
this is true.
there's an improper way to use Clorox as well. So
that's right. So you have to read the labels, right? Like Dan was just saying, read that label. It's got important information on it, and never repackage your bleach. Make sure that it stays in its original container. All of these pesticides have a container that's been designed to hold it, whether it breathes or doesn't breathe. All of these things are taken into consideration. So make sure you're keeping it in the original packaging. But back to soap. So a lot of the times I'll get a question as to, well, what kind of soap should I use? Can I use my hand soap? Can I use my laundry soap? Can I use my dish soap? And again, it all's going to come down to what else is in the soap. Are there perfumes? Are there dyes? Because those can impact your plant health as well. You want to avoid anything with perfumes and dyes. You want to try to have those longer chain fatty acids. So check what was used to make that particular soap. And when in doubt, spend a couple dollars and buy an insecticidal soap. They're not expensive, and it's just safer, in my opinion. But even if you have a insecticidal soap that's designed to use on plants, there are still plants that you shouldn't use them on.
Be especially cautious when you're working with sensitive plants, and because you got to remember, plants are full of wax, especially on the upper sides of the leaves, right? So they got that cuticle layer. That cuticle layer keeps the moisture inside the leaf. It also filters out some other lights that really aren't very beneficial for photosynthesis, and can break down some of the components of the leaf. So you put enough soap in there, you break down those waxes, and then you get some strong sunlight in there. It can cause a lot of photo damage, a lot of bleaching and sun scald, and that can cause a lot of issues with certain sensitive plants.
Yeah. Right. So plants that are known to be more easily injured by insecticidal soap would include jade, horse chestnut, mountain ash, Japanese maple, gardenias, bleeding hearts, sweet pea, maidenhair fern, crown of thorns, latana, nasturtiums, Easter lilies, and also certain varieties of azaleas, begonias, camellias, fuchsias, geraniums, and impatiens. They can also be sensitive.
Hawthorn, cherries, plums, some tomato varieties even.
So if you're not sure, always test a small area first. Like test a leaf, one leaf, see what happens to that leaf. If it gets burnt, then you've only lost one leaf. If you spray the whole plant, you might lose the whole plant. So you really want to test those more sensitive plants. I know jade is incredibly sensitive to even just touching, so it's a challenge. But another thing to consider with your plants is beyond what type of plants it is if it's under drought stress or another kind of stress. Stress plants can be intolerant to any extra abuse. And so if you've had like here this summer, a lot of our plants are under stress. And if you were to spray them with something that reduces the cuticle, it could increase the amount of moisture that's being sucked out by the surrounding air and further increase the drought stress. So it's really important to not treat plants that are under stress. And if you have new, fresh growth, like early in the spring, you want to make sure to wait till that growth hardens off before you treat it. If you're treating, let's say, those new evergreen shoots that are just starting to pop and elongate, those are going to be super sensitive and you could kill them by spraying them with just this soapy water. So make sure you recognize what's going on with your plant in addition to this pest that you're trying to manage. And also, even if we have had some rain, if it is over 90 degrees, you definitely don't want to use an insecticidal soap again because you're going to get more of those phytotoxicity reactions. And another benefit to using a manufactured horticultural soap over making something at home is that it'll have a label and it will have instructions like don't use over 90 degrees and wait for new growth to harden off, things like that. Don't use it on these plants. It's only effective on these insects.
Yes. I was about to say you'll see the sensitive plants on there. Right.
Yeah, and they've tested these. So if you use it and you're following their instructions, you have some recourse to get your plant replaced. But if you're using your own concoction that you built up in the kitchen, then you don't have that kind of recourse.
Yeah, because you're off label.
Right. And so it's a challenge, right? Because I'm all for do it yourself, make it at home, but there are certain limitations. And so if you know soaps, let's say you make soaps and you know all about those short chains and long chains, maybe you could make your own insecticidal soap just because you have a better understanding of how these different fats work and you can make sure that you've got the right balance to protect your plants.
Yeah, I was looking at a list of good candidates for soapy water or insecticidal soaps, depending on whether you made it or whether you bought it. And some of those candidates, besides aphids, whiteflies, thrips, and mites. I mean, those are like one,
Yep.
two, three. Those four have to be in the top 10 pests of indoor plants. If not, they are the top four.
Yeah.
they're up there.
Yeah. And it can be effective on other insects as well, but typically, like any insecticide, those younger nymphal stages are going to be more susceptible. By the time it's a full-grown adult, it's probably not going to do a whole lot of good for you. So scout early, scout often, treat early, treat as necessary. So remember, you have to get a really good coating of insecticidal soap in order to kill the insect. And same thing if you're using soap to kill plants, you have to get a good solid coating and coat the entire plant, or it's not going to do as much.
That's right. And just kind of a recap on how soap works, right? Because a lot of times it's just one of those things you grew up with. It's safe because you've been around it so long, or you just grown accustomed to it and you're not scared of it, right? But it can be used improperly. But soaps are molecules that have a polar end and a long or short, I shouldn't just always call it long, but long or short hydrophobic tail. And remember that when you're washing with soap, typically grease, you'll notice that the grease almost kind of disappears into the lather that you're making. And that's because those long hydrophobic tails are attaching themselves to the grease molecules and the hydrophilic heads are just getting washed away. So they're able to pull the grease and make it soluble into the water, and they just go down the drain. And they don't clog anything because they're soluble into the water. But, we think of beneficial things like waxes and oils in our hands, waxes in the plants. And they'll also rip those things as well. So that's just the chemistry of soaps. And it's always really good to know how things work when you're using them, because at times things will surprise you. And if you start investigating how it works, it usually makes sense, but but it doesn't always have to be very complicated. The way the soaps are going to kill insects and the way they're going to hurt plants is pretty much the same way. They're going to break down waxes, they're going to break down protective layers of oil, and they're going to cause desiccation through either holes or missing protective molecules in there, such as oils and waxes. And it just cause crack hands, kill insects, or just desiccate plants.
Right. And make sure that you are checking, if you are making your own, that you are checking that it's not a hard soap with sodium salts. What you're looking for is a soft soap with potassium salts of fatty acids. So try to find those words, and when in doubt, give your local extension office a call and ask.
That's right. And one other thing, those perfumes you're talking about, right? All those additives that we have in conventional soaps that we use, those aren't going to be good for your plants either. So just remember that.
Hey, we just wanted to say thank you to everyone who has sent us an evaluation. That information is so very important. We are still looking for feedback from our listeners. So if there's a show that you've listened to that has really helped you, then please go ahead and fill out that evaluation again and just let us know how you're using the information for the show.
Yeah, let us know how our show is helping you, whether it's a major thing, whether it's a little gold nugget you're able to get out of it. We try to mix a lot of our experiences with the show and just want to know how it helps you out.
You can fill out these evaluations as many times as you want. And also, you can use those evaluations to tell us if there's a topic that you would like us to address. So we do welcome that. And we're always looking for new ideas on things that you feel are important. So let us know what you want to learn from our show. You can reach me at 304-234-3673. That's 304-234-3673.
And you can also contact me at 740-695-1455. That's 740-695-1455.
Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.